When I first rolled my Harley Davidson into the driveway of my new suburban home, I had no idea that machine would stir up more chaos than a tornado at a trailer park. It was a 2017 Road Glide, black chrome, loud as sin, and polished like a mirror. The kind of bike that made old men nostalgic and teenagers dream. I just retired from 25 years in the Marines, bought myself a place in a quiet HOA neighborhood in northern Georgia, and figured I'd earned the right to enjoy a little peace and throttle therapy. But I hadn't been there a week before the first storm brewed, and her name was Karen. Every HOA's got one, and this one came with her own entourage, a spoiled 22-year-old son named Tyler, a loudmouth who thought his mom's position on the HOA board made him the sheriff of the street. The first time I met them was a Saturday morning. I'd been tuning the Harley, sipping coffee, and playing some old rock through the garage speakers. Nothing crazy, volume at a reasonable level, but apparently, my music and the occasional rev of the engine violated the sanctity of the HOA's sound harmony clause. Karen strutted down my driveway like she owned the asphalt, her blonde bob bouncing, clipboard clutched to her chest like a badge. Tyler followed behind her in gym shorts and flip-flops, chewing gum and glaring like a bouncer at a biker bar. "Excuse me," Karen snapped, her voice already dripping with that passive-aggressive tone suburban royalty use when they think they're being polite. "We have quiet hours until 10 a.m. on weekends." I checked my watch. 10:07, then I guess we're good, I said, grinning and wiping my hands on a rag. That grin didn't sit well with her. "You're new here," she said, as if I hadn't noticed. "We expect homeowners to follow community guidelines. This isn't, whatever kind of neighborhood you're used to." I could have said a dozen things, about the places I'd lived, the people I'd served with, the things I'd seen, but I just nodded. "Copy that," I said. "I'll read the handbook." Tyler smirked, chiming in like a parrot. "You better, old man. My mom's head of the HOA. You don't want to mess with that." I stared at him for a long second, and he eventually looked away. The kid had that kind of confidence only money and a lack of consequences could build. I'd seen it before in recruits who'd never been told, no. Karen left me a packet of HOA rules in my mailbox that afternoon, each page highlighted in different colors like a teacher grading an essay. I skimmed it over dinner and had to laugh. These people had rules for everything, the color of your shutters, how tall your grass could be, even the brand of trash can you used. My Harley alone violated at least 3 appearance guidelines. It wasn't even parked on the street, it sat in my driveway, covered with a tarp, but apparently, motorcycles were unsightly. I figured I'd ignore it until it became a real problem. Big mistake. A week later, I came home from a ride and found a notice taped to my front door. Vehicle violation, unauthorized motorcycle. Remove immediately or face fines. It was signed by Karen herself, complete with her looping cursive signature like she was signing the Declaration of Independence. I laughed again, but this time, it wasn't funny. I called the HOA office and got her voicemail. "Hey, Karen," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "My motorcycle is registered, insured, and parked on private property. If you've got a problem, we can talk like adults. Otherwise, stop taping threats to my door." That message must have hit a nerve because the next morning, I caught Tyler standing by my driveway, phone in hand, taking pictures of my Harley. "You got a problem, kid?" I asked, stepping out from the garage. He flinched but didn't back down. "Mom said I gotta document violations. It's part of HOA policy." I walked closer, and he took a step back. "Here's a policy for you, don't mess with someone's property. Especially when you don't understand what you're dealing with." He rolled his eyes and walked off. I thought that was the end of it. Turns out, it was just the beginning of a war I never wanted, but one I was damn sure going to win. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of voices outside. I looked out the window and saw 2 police cruisers parked at the curb, lights flashing. Tyler stood there waving his arms, Karen talking animatedly to an officer. My Harley sat right where I'd left it, gleaming in the morning sun. I threw on jeans and a t-shirt, stepped outside, and walked straight toward them. The younger officer looked uncomfortable. "Sir, we got a call about a stolen motorcycle on the premises." Karen folded her arms, lips curling in satisfaction. "Yes, officer. It's that one. My son says it matches the description of a Harley that was reported stolen last week." I raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" Tyler puffed out his chest. "Yeah. I saw one just like it online. Same color, same model. I think this guy stole it." I laughed, loudly. The officers exchanged glances. "Gentlemen," I said, "if you'll give me a second, I'll get the title and registration." I went inside, grabbed the paperwork, and handed it over. Everything was pristine, legal, and registered in my name. The senior officer took one look inside. "Everything checks out. It's his bike." Karen blinked. But it's so loud. It's not appropriate for this neighborhood." "Ma'am," the officer said, "loud isn't illegal." False reports, however. Her eyes widened, and she stammered. "It was just a misunderstanding." I smiled. Sure it was. They left, and for a few weeks, things were quiet. Too quiet. I should have known she was plotting something. Karen and her son didn't back down that easily. They were the kind of people who couldn't stand losing, especially to someone who didn't bow to their little suburban kingdom. It started small, petty letters about grass height, a complaint about my porch light being too bright, a warning about my trash bins being visible from the street. I could practically feel her peeking through her blinds every evening, waiting for a chance to write me up. But I didn't bite. I'd dealt with worse than HOA drama. I kept my yard immaculate, paid dues on time, followed every rule to the letter. If she wanted a fight, she'd have to invent a reason, and that's exactly what she did. One Saturday afternoon, I went out to check the mail and saw Tyler standing beside my bike again. Only this time, the tarp was pulled halfway off, and he was sitting on the Harley. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I barked. He flinched, startled, but tried to play it cool. "Just checking it out, man. Chill. I'm thinking of getting one." "Get your own," I said, stepping closer. "You don't touch mine." He smirked, swinging a leg off. "Whatever. It's just a bike." "Wrong," I said, my voice low. "It's my bike. And if you ever lay a hand on it again, you'll regret it." He laughed, but I could see his bravado cracking. I didn't threaten him, I just let my tone carry the weight. Marines know how to make a point without raising their voice. That evening, Karen stormed over again, red-faced. "You threatened my son." "I told him to stay off my property," I replied. "That's not a threat, it's a boundary." She jabbed a finger toward me. "You think you can intimidate people here because you're some kind of tough guy? This is a respectable community." I just stared at her. "Respect goes both ways, Karen." She huffed, spun around, and stomped off, muttering something about getting the board involved. By Monday, I got a certified letter from the HOA claiming aggressive behavior toward community members and violation of property guidelines. I laughed, took photos of everything, and sent a polite email back, "All allegations are false. Please forward any further communication through my attorney." Except, at that point, I didn't actually have one. Yet. What I did have was a friend from my military days, James Callahan, who'd gone on to become a state attorney. We'd served together overseas, and he'd once told me, "If you ever get in legal trouble, call me first." I hadn't spoken to him in years, but after that letter, I figured it was time. When I explained the situation, he chuckled. "An HOA? Man, they picked the wrong guy. We met for lunch the next day, and I showed him the letters, fines, and photos. He skimmed through them, then said, "They've overstepped. You're on solid legal ground. Let me handle it." That moment changed everything. I didn't know it yet, but Karen and her son were about to learn that you don't mess with a man who's got friends in high places, and the law on his side. After that meeting with James, I walked out of the diner with a sense of calm I hadn't felt since I moved into that neighborhood. The man didn't just know the law, he was the law, or at least as close as anyone could get without wearing a judge's robe. I handed over every HOA notice, every passive-aggressive email Karen had sent, and even a few videos from my doorbell camera that showed her and Tyler snooping around my driveway when they thought I wasn't home. James told me to sit tight and not respond to anything unless it came through him. Let them hang themselves, he said with that easy confidence of a man who'd spent years dismantling bad cases. And that's exactly what they did. A week later, I started getting new letters from the HOA, this time accusing me of operating an unlicensed vehicle repair business. Apparently, because I changed my own oil in the garage, that meant I was running a commercial enterprise. I almost choked on my coffee reading it. Karen had attached photos, clearly taken from her window, of me working on my Harley. The captions claimed I was bringing unsavory traffic into the neighborhood. I sent them straight to James, who responded with a single sentence, "Cease and desist from further harassment, or face civil action for defamation and unlawful surveillance." 2 days after that email went out, the HOA president, a guy named Greg, called me personally. He sounded nervous. "Mr. Daniels," he said, "we've received communication from the state attorney's office." I wasn't aware this matter had escalated that far. "Then maybe you should have been aware of what your board's been doing," I replied. "Your vice chair's been trespassing and filing false reports." He stammered something about misunderstandings, and promised to review the matter internally. That was HOA speak for, "We're terrified, but we don't want to admit it." I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. But Karen wasn't done. People like her never stop when they lose, they double down. And her son? He was about to do something that'd turn the whole thing from petty harassment into a full-blown criminal case. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the air's cool, the sky's pink, and you can actually hear the cicadas humming. I'd just come back from a ride, took the Harley out to the foothills, let the wind wash off the week's frustration, and I parked in my driveway, same spot as always. I went inside, showered, and sat down with a beer. Around 10, I heard a faint clatter outside. Not loud, just enough to make me look up. When you've spent decades in combat zones, your instincts never really turn off. I slipped my boots back on, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. My motion sensor lights kicked on, and there he was, Tyler, fumbling with my Harley's handlebars. For a second, I thought maybe he was just being stupid again, trying to sit on it. But then I saw it, he had a small screwdriver in his hand, trying to jam it into the ignition housing. "Hey!" I barked. He jumped so hard he nearly fell over. I wasn't doing anything," he stammered, backing up. "The hell you weren't," I said, walking toward him. "You trying to steal my bike?" He held up his hands. "No, dude, no, I just wanted to see if it started." "Chill out." I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. "You've got 3 seconds to get off my property before I call the cops myself." That got him moving. He stumbled backward, tripped on the curb, and sprinted across the street toward his mom's house. I stood there, breathing heavy, trying to calm down. I took pictures, lots of them, and then checked the camera feed from my garage. Sure enough, it had caught everything. The little punk had walked right up my driveway at 10:02 p.m. and started messing with my Harley like it was some kind of toy. The next morning, I sent the footage to James. He didn't even hesitate. "File a police report," he said. I'll handle the rest. That afternoon, 2 officers came by. They reviewed the footage, took statements, and said they'd be talking to Tyler. I told them I wasn't pressing charges yet, I just wanted it on record. They nodded, thanked me for staying calm, and left. By that evening, the whole neighborhood knew. You could feel it in the way people stared a little longer when they walked their dogs, or how a few of the men nodded at me like they knew what was going on. HOA drama was one thing, but attempted theft. That was another level. Karen, of course, came storming over that night, red-faced and furious. "How dare you accuse my son of theft?" she shouted from the sidewalk. I stepped onto the porch, holding my phone up. "I don't need to accuse him, Karen. The camera did that for me." She froze for a second. You can't use surveillance on your neighbors. That's illegal." I smirked. "Actually, Georgia's a one-party consent state for video on private property. You might want to look that up before you embarrass yourself again." She glared at me, opened her mouth to retort, then spun around and stomped home. I watched her go, shaking my head. The next few days were quiet, eerily quiet. Then, just when I thought things might be settling down, I got a knock at the door on Sunday morning. I opened it to find 2 deputies standing there again. "Mr. Daniels," one said, "we received a report that you threatened and assaulted a young man in the neighborhood." I actually laughed. "Let me guess, Tyler?" They exchanged a look. "We just need to ask a few questions." I invited them in, offered them coffee, and pulled up my doorbell footage again, showing me standing 10 feet away from Tyler, not laying a finger on him. I even showed them the timestamp, the angle, the whole deal. The deputy scratched his chin. "Yeah, this doesn't look like assault." "Nope," I said. "But filing a false police report does." They thanked me for my time and left. I called James immediately. He didn't say much, just, "All right, now they've really stepped in it." 2 days later, he filed a formal complaint against both Karen and Tyler for harassment, defamation, and criminal mischief. The HOA board got dragged into it by association. Word spread fast, and suddenly, neighbors who'd never said 2 words to me before started waving, bringing over cookies, even offering to testify that Karen had been targeting me since day 1. Turns out, she'd been pulling similar stunts with other homeowners, bullying, threatening fines, and bending rules whenever she felt like it. James told me to keep documenting everything, and I did. Every letter, every visit, every glare across the street. I didn't rise to any of it, I just built my case. Then came the kicker. A week later, I came home from running errands to find a tow truck in my driveway. My Harley was already halfway up the ramp. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, running toward the driver. He jumped. I got a work order from the HOA to remove unauthorized vehicles. "Put it down. Now." The guy hesitated, but one look at my face must have told him he was dealing with the wrong man. He lowered the ramp, unhooked the Harley, and backed his truck off the property. I snapped photos of everything, including the order form taped to my mailbox, signed, once again, by Karen. That was it. That was the final straw. I sent everything to James, and his reply came back within the hour, "Perfect. That's unauthorized entry, property damage, and unlawful seizure attempt. Sit tight, I'm calling in a favor." The next day, an unmarked black SUV pulled up to my house. Out stepped James, suit pressed, sunglasses on, and another man I didn't recognize until he introduced himself, Assistant District Attorney Mitchell. They spent an hour reviewing my footage, documents, and the letters I'd collected. By the time they left, I knew the game had changed. Karen wasn't just facing HOA backlash now, she was on the radar of people who prosecuted crimes. That evening, I was sitting on the porch when Karen came out of her house, saw the state plate on James's SUV, and froze mid-step. The look on her face was priceless, somewhere between horror and disbelief. I just raised my beer in a little toast as she turned and hurried back inside. From that point on, everything started unraveling for her. The HOA board distanced themselves, the president resigned, and suddenly, every homeowner was demanding a meeting to review the conduct of leadership. Karen went from queen bee to public enemy number one in less than a week. But the real showdown was still coming. Tyler, fueled by wounded pride and his mom's delusion, wasn't done. He was about to make one last, very stupid move that would drag his mother's name, and the HOA's reputation, into a courtroom. And I was more than ready for it. The night before it all went down, the neighborhood was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. I was sitting on my porch, boots up, beer in hand, watching the glow of porch lights blink on across the cul-de-sac. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt something close to peace. The air had that crisp fall bite, the kind that smells like leaves and wet asphalt, and for a minute, I thought maybe the worst had passed. Maybe Karen and her brat had finally realized they were outmatched. But that kind of wishful thinking never lasts long. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of an engine, then a crash. I threw on jeans, grabbed my flashlight, and ran outside. My first thought was that someone had hit a deer. My second thought, as I rounded the corner, was that I was about to lose my mind. My Harley, my beautiful Harley, was lying on its side at the end of the driveway. The headlight was cracked, the handlebars twisted, and the paint was scraped raw down the side. Tire marks streaked across my lawn like black scars. And there, at the edge of the street, was a familiar sight, a silver Toyota with a dented bumper. The driver's door was open, and standing beside it, wobbling and reeking of beer, was Tyler. He looked up, eyes glassy, and slurred, "You shoulda just sold it, man." I froze for a second, rage boiling so fast it made my hands shake. "You crashed into my bike?" I said, voice low, too calm. "It was in the way," he mumbled, gesturing vaguely. "Stupid thing. Nobody wants your stupid bike or junk around here." I took a step forward, and for one dangerous second, I had to remind myself of every discipline lesson the Corps ever taught me. You don't hit kids, even when they act like punks. You don't lose control. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Say that again," I said. He blinked, confused. What? "That you crashed into it." He squinted into the light. "Whatever. It's just a bike." The flashing blue lights appeared at the end of the street before I even called them. Turns out one of the neighbors had heard the noise and phoned it in. The officers recognized me from before, and when they saw the scene, their faces hardened. Tyler tried to talk his way out of it, but the smell of alcohol did him in. They breathalyzed him, cuffed him, and read him his rights right there on the curb while Karen came running out of her house in a bathrobe, screaming his name. "Don't you touch my son," she shrieked, voice cracking. He didn't do anything. One of the officers calmly held up his hand. "Ma'am, he's being arrested for DUI, reckless endangerment, and property damage. Please step back." Her eyes darted between me, the bike, and the officers. "You set this up. You planted him." "You, Karen," I said, cutting her off, "you might want to stop talking before you dig that hole any deeper." She spun toward me, trembling with fury. "You'll regret this. You and your little lawyer friend think you can ruin us, but this isn't over." I didn't even answer. I just walked over to the Harley, took one last look at the damage, and muttered, "You're damn right it's not over." The next morning, my driveway was a crime scene, photos, measurements, everything. The officers took my statement, then had the Harley hauled to a certified repair shop for documentation. James showed up an hour later, coffee in hand, eyes sharp. He walked the scene quietly, taking it all in before turning to me. "This is perfect," he said. "Perfect?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He nodded. He was drunk. He crossed property lines. That's felony-level damage. Between the video footage, witness statements, and the DUI, this kid's cooked, and his mother's interference makes her complicit. Complicit? James grinned. You'll see. Within 48 hours, the case was moving faster than I could keep up. Tyler was charged with DUI and reckless destruction of property. But that wasn't the end of it, because Karen had tried to use her position on the HOA board to intervene. She'd shown up at the impound lot demanding the bike be released to the community association for investigation. The clerk, bless her heart, recorded the whole exchange. When she mentioned she'd take this to her contacts on the police commission, that was the nail in her coffin. James got a copy of that audio, and it became exhibit number 1 in what he later called the HOA meltdown of the decade. News travels fast in small towns. By the end of the week, half the neighborhood knew Karen's son had been arrested, and whispers started circulating that the HOA was under investigation. A few residents even started showing up at my door, apologizing for not speaking up sooner. One older guy, Mr. Langley, told me Karen had fined him $300 the previous year for having a flagpole that was too tall. Another woman, Shannon, said Karen tried to block her from building a wheelchair ramp for her mother. It was all starting to make sense. This wasn't about my Harley. It was about control. Karen had built herself a little fiefdom, and I'd just knocked down the first wall. James and his team began compiling witness statements, financial records, and correspondence. They found that Karen had been funneling HOA maintenance funds into a consulting service she ran through her personal account. The name on the paperwork? KLT Property Solutions. The K and T, of course, stood for Karen and Tyler. By the time the state attorney's office got wind of it, things escalated fast. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, and for the first time since I'd moved there, the clubhouse parking lot was full. Homeowners packed the room, the air thick with tension. I stood near the back, arms crossed, while Karen sat at the front table, pale and sweating, trying to maintain her composure. Greg, the former HOA president who'd quietly resigned, showed up too, escorted by an attorney of his own. James stood beside me, calm and unreadable, a small folder tucked under his arm. When the meeting started, Karen tried to take charge. This gathering, she said, tapping her microphone, is for the purpose of addressing false accusations being spread about me and my family. Someone from the crowd shouted, "Then why's your kid in jail, Karen?" The room erupted in murmurs and laughter. Karen's jaw clenched, her eyes darting nervously toward me. James stepped forward and introduced himself. "Good evening, everyone. My name is James Callahan, State Attorney's Office. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Daniels regarding an ongoing legal matter involving harassment, property destruction, and potential misuse of HOA funds." You could have heard a pin drop. Karen tried to interrupt. "This is inappropriate," but James kept going, voice steady. "We've reviewed several years of HOA transactions and discovered multiple instances of unaccounted expenses, unauthorized fines, and personal transfers made under Ms. Karen Thompson's authority. Additionally, her son, Tyler, is currently facing charges connected to a DUI and vandalism incident targeting Mr. Daniels' property." Her face went white. "That's a lie," she screamed, voice cracking. "You can't prove anything." James calmly opened the folder and held up a stack of papers. "Bank records, meeting minutes, and video evidence, ma'am. All subpoenaed legally." That was the moment it all fell apart. The room erupted again, people shouting, demanding resignations, asking for refunds of their HOA fees. Karen tried to shout over them, but her voice was lost in the noise. Someone called her a crook. Someone else yelled that she should be arrested. I just stood there, silent, watching the empire she'd built crumble piece by piece. Within a week, Karen resigned for personal reasons. The HOA board voted to suspend all fines and launch a full audit. The county attorney's office took over the case, and James made sure Tyler's charges stuck. I thought that'd be the end of it. But there was one final twist, the kind you couldn't make up if you tried. About a month later, I got a certified letter from the state attorney's office. Inside was a notice that the case had expanded into a criminal investigation. Apparently, Karen's misuse of HOA funds wasn't limited to my neighborhood. She'd been managing 3 other associations across the county using the same fake consulting firm. Over $200,000 in misappropriated funds. When the charges came down, the local news picked it up. I remember sitting in my recliner, watching the report with a cup of coffee in hand. The anchor said, local HOA board member Karen Thompson faces multiple felony charges, including fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Then they showed her mugshot, her once perfect hair a tangled mess, her smug expression replaced by disbelief. As for Tyler, he got probation and community service. The judge ordered him to pay restitution for the damage to my Harley. I didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. I just handed over the repair bill and said, lesson learned, kid. But the real satisfaction came a few months later, when the HOA dissolved completely. The homeowners voted to terminate it, sell off the assets, and convert to an independent neighborhood association with voluntary dues. The new bylaws even had a clause named after me, the Daniels provision, which explicitly forbade any board member from using personal bias or intimidation against residents. It was poetic justice. I had my Harley repaired, shinier than ever, and parked it right back in the driveway where it belonged. Every time I fired it up, I could see a few of the old neighbors peek out their windows, not with annoyance this time, but with quiet approval. And every time I looked across the street at that empty house, Karen's house, now up for sale, I couldn't help but smile. I didn't go looking for a fight when I moved here. But sometimes, a fight finds you, and when it does, you stand your ground. Especially when you've got the truth, the law, and a roaring Harley on your side. After the storm passed and the neighborhood finally started to breathe again, I found myself in a strange place of quiet triumph. It wasn't victory in the Hollywood sense, no fireworks, no applause, no slow-motion walk into the sunset. It was quieter than that. The kind of peace that comes when you've finally cleared the battlefield and realize you're still standing. My Harley sat gleaming in the driveway, freshly repaired and running smoother than ever. The smell of fuel and leather mixed with autumn air every morning when I started it up, and that low rumble from the pipes had gone from being a violation to a sort of anthem for the street. People waved now. The same folks who used to side-eye me from behind their hedges or whisper behind their porch lights were suddenly friendly. I'd find small gestures in my mailbox, a thank you note from the older couple down the road, cookies from Shannon, even a six-pack from Mr. Langley with a note that said, thanks for doing what we all wanted to do. I didn't set out to be the guy who broke the HOA's chokehold, but apparently, that's what I'd become. For a few weeks, life was good. The neighborhood held a barbecue, our first one in years, apparently. Someone joked about how Karen used to ban grills because of smoke violations, and everyone laughed like they were finally allowed to breathe. I brought the Harley down just for fun, parked it near the park entrance, and kids lined up to take pictures with it. Tyler, of course, wasn't around. Word was, after his probation hearing, he and Karen moved out of town, quietly, without fanfare. I didn't feel bad. Actions have consequences, and they'd written that ending themselves. But peace in suburbia never lasts forever. Not because of people like Karen, those are easy to spot, but because once you take away a tyrant, something else always tries to fill the void. The new HOA, well, the neighborhood committee, as they called it, started out great. Voluntary dues, open meetings, community-driven decisions. But about 2 months in, a few of the same old personalities started creeping back into power. The kind of people who love titles, who can't resist turning a friendly gathering into bureaucracy. I saw the signs early on, little flyers reminding residents about lawn standards, polite suggestions about acceptable paint colors, whispers about creating a vehicle noise policy. I wasn't worried yet, but I watched. Then one afternoon, I got an email from Greg, the former HOA president who'd resigned when everything went down. He'd gone radio silent during the fallout, and to be honest, I hadn't expected to hear from him again. His message was short: "Hey, Mike. I know we didn't get off on the right foot, but I've got something you'll want to see. Mind meeting for coffee tomorrow?" Curiosity got the better of me. We met at a diner just off Route 19, the same one where I'd first met James. Greg looked rough, tired eyes, unshaven, like a man who hadn't slept right in months. "I owe you an apology," he said the second I sat down. I knew Karen was pulling shady stuff. Not all of it, but enough. She threatened to smear me if I didn't go along. Said she'd ruin my reputation, claim I was complicit. I didn't have the guts to stand up back then. I leaned back. "You're standing now. That counts for something." He nodded, slid a flash drive across the table. "This is from the old HOA database. Financials, communications, board notes, the works. I didn't delete it when she told me to. Figured one day, someone might need it." "What's on it?" He hesitated. "Let's just say Karen wasn't the only one pocketing money." I took the drive, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and finished my coffee in silence. That night, I plugged it into my laptop. The folders were a mess, dozens of Excel sheets, scanned receipts, emails. But one file caught my eye: community_contracts_2019-2023.xls. Inside were payments to various vendors for landscaping, security, and maintenance. Some were legit, but others, the names didn't match any registered businesses. I cross-referenced a few online and came up empty. One entry in particular jumped out: Silver Ridge Security Consultants, $28,400. I'd never seen a security patrol in our neighborhood. I sent the info to James with a quick message: "You busy?" He called 10 minutes later, his voice low and serious. "Where did you get this?" "Greg said it's the original HOA data." There was a pause. "You realize you're sitting on felony-level evidence again, right?" I sighed. "Figures." Within days, James's office reopened the case, not against Karen this time, but against a larger network of HOA management companies that had been quietly laundering money through shell vendors. Apparently, Karen had been one of several regional coordinators, funneling money up the chain in exchange for kickbacks. The entire thing spanned 3 counties. And somehow, my neighborhood, our quiet little suburb, had been the starting point that exposed it. By Christmas, it was on the news again. The same anchor, same tone of disbelief, saying, "A regional property management scandal has been uncovered, involving several homeowners associations across Georgia." The investigation was initially sparked by a resident dispute in the Cedar Pines subdivision. That resident was me. I got calls from reporters, requests for interviews, even a letter from a law professor at Emory who wanted to use the case as a study on the abuse of microgovernance structures. I turned them all down. I wasn't looking for fame. I just wanted peace. But peace came in a form I didn't expect. One morning, I woke to a knock on the door. It was the mail carrier, holding a certified envelope. Inside was a letter from the county's legal department, addressed to me personally. It said the county was formally recognizing my cooperation and assistance in exposing the HOA corruption network, and that they were recommending a community commendation for upholding legal integrity and civic responsibility. I couldn't help but laugh. A medal for surviving HOA warfare, what a world. James called that night, congratulating me. "You did good, Marine," he said. "You held your line." I thought about that after we hung up. About lines, where you draw them, and what it costs to hold them. My line had been my Harley. It wasn't about the bike itself, it was about freedom, ownership, the principle that no one gets to dictate what you can enjoy on your own property. And that line had exposed something much bigger. Life finally settled after that. The neighborhood committee learned their lesson. We voted to dissolve even the voluntary structure and opted for full independence. Everyone handled their own property, their own rules, their own peace. It was like we'd gone back in time to when neighbors just lived. Helped each other. Mowed lawns, waved, minded their own business. Every morning, I'd start the Harley and take it for a short ride, nothing loud or showy, just enough to feel the road under me. Kids waved from school buses, folks smiled, and even the dogs seemed happier. Then one afternoon, months later, I was cleaning the garage when a truck pulled into the driveway. Out stepped Tyler. I froze. He looked different, older somehow. His hair was shorter, his shoulders slumped, but there was something in his eyes that wasn't there before. Humility, maybe. Or guilt. He walked up slowly. "Hey," he said, voice quiet. "Can we talk?" I nodded, motioned toward the porch. He sat, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the ground. "I came to apologize. For everything. The cops, the bike, all of it. I was a mess back then. My mom, she wasn't right in the head after my dad left. I went along with her crap because it made her happy, I guess." He rubbed his eyes. "I was drinking that night. I shouldn't have even been behind the wheel." I didn't say anything for a while. Just let the silence hang there. Finally, I said, "You know, Tyler, I spent a long time being angry at you. But seeing you here, saying that, it means something. Owning your mistakes takes guts." He looked up, surprised. "You're not gonna yell or anything?" I chuckled. "Son, I've yelled enough for a lifetime. You did wrong. You paid for it. Now fix it by doing better." He nodded slowly. "I've been doing community service. Working at a rehab center. Trying to get my act together. Thought maybe I'd stop by and say thanks." "For what?" "For not ruining my life when you could've. You had every right to press charges harder." I looked at the Harley parked by the curb, sunlight gleaming off the chrome. "You already ruined it once," I said with a faint smile. "Didn't need to ruin anything else." He laughed weakly, stood up, and extended a hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, steady. As he walked back to his truck, I felt something I didn't expect: closure. Real closure. The kind you can't fake or force. I watched him drive off and fired up the Harley. The engine purred to life, steady and smooth, and I rode down that same street that had once been filled with tension and gossip and bad blood. Now, it was just home. The past still lingered, of course, it always does. But it didn't haunt me anymore. I'd learned that sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't just protect your rights, it can shake the rot out of a whole system. And sometimes, all it takes to start that chain reaction is one stubborn man, one loud Harley, and a Karen who picked the wrong battle. A full year passed after the chaos died down, and life in Cedar Pines turned into something almost picturesque. The lawns stayed neat, not because of fines, but because people wanted to take pride in their homes again. The smell of barbecue drifted through the air most weekends, kids rode bikes down the street without anyone shouting about noise ordinances, and the only meetings we had now were casual bonfire nights where we'd swap stories, laugh, and watch the stars. It was like the place had finally remembered what a neighborhood was supposed to be. I'd settled into my own rhythm too. The Harley had become more than a symbol of defiance, it was therapy. Every Saturday morning, I'd take it out for a ride through the back roads, hit the highway, and ride until the sun climbed high and the world felt open again. That feeling of wind against your chest, the low rumble under you, the horizon stretching out, it reminded me why I fought in the first place. It wasn't about rebellion or revenge anymore. It was about peace earned. One day, while I was tuning up the bike, a familiar black sedan pulled up at the curb. James stepped out, wearing his usual half-grin and aviators. "Thought I'd check in on my favorite neighborhood troublemaker," he said, walking up the driveway. "Retired troublemaker," I corrected him, wiping my hands on a rag. "Now I'm just a quiet guy with a loud bike." He laughed. "That bike might be quieter than the noise you caused in City Hall. You've got no idea how deep that investigation went after you handed me Greg's files." "Oh, I got a hint," I said. "Every time I turn on the news and hear about another HOA scandal bust, I figure I helped light that fuse." He leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "You did more than that, Mike. You changed policy. The state's actually drafting new HOA oversight legislation, transparency requirements, mandatory audits, public record access. All because some guy refused to let a spoiled kid take his Harley." I chuckled. "Funny how small things snowball, huh?" He nodded. "You planning to stay here long term?" I glanced toward the street. The houses were calm, the air soft with the scent of pine and grill smoke. "Yeah. I think I've earned a little stillness." He smiled, gave a short salute, and headed back to his car. Before getting in, he turned back and said, "For what it's worth, you're the kind of neighbor every town needs, loud pipes and all." Then he drove off, leaving me standing in the quiet hum of a Saturday afternoon. I spent the next few months rebuilding things, both literally and figuratively. I renovated the backyard, added a small shed that doubled as a workshop, and even started helping a few neighbors with their own home repairs. Turns out, being the guy who stood up to the HOA earned me a sort of local legend status. Folks started coming to me for advice about dealing with property disputes, or just to vent about bureaucratic nonsense. Then came a letter in early spring. This one wasn't from the county or James, it was from a motorcycle club in Atlanta. Apparently, someone had heard about the whole Harley incident and shared it online. My story had gone viral again, posts, videos, news clips. The club called themselves Veterans on the Road, a group that did charity rides for injured service members and community outreach. They invited me to join their annual state run. I hesitated at first. It had been years since I rode in a group. But something in me missed the camaraderie, the sound of multiple engines roaring together, the unspoken brotherhood of riders who just get it. So, that April, I strapped on my helmet, rolled the Harley out of the driveway, and joined them at the meetup spot on the outskirts of the city. When I arrived, there were at least 50 bikes lined up, Harleys, Indians, Triumphs, all shining under the morning sun. A few guys recognized me immediately. "You the HOA guy?" one of them shouted with a grin. "Heard you made some rich folks cry over a noise complaint." I laughed. "Guilty as charged." They clapped me on the back and handed me a patch, black and silver, embroidered with wings and the words "Ride Free, Live True." It wasn't an official club patch, just a token of respect. But it meant more than I could say. The ride was incredible, miles of open road, the sound of engines sinking like heartbeats. We passed through small towns, over rivers, through forests thick with green. At one rest stop, a man in his 60s pulled up next to me, looked at my bike, and said, "That the one they tried to take?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "But she's still mine." He nodded slowly. "Good. Some things are worth fighting for. Not 'cause they're expensive, but because they're yours." That line stuck with me the whole way home. When I returned to Cedar Pines, something unexpected happened. A few neighbors had gotten inspired by the Veterans on the Road story, they'd seen the online coverage, watched the interviews, even shared the posts. Suddenly, there was this sense of pride in our little community. People weren't embarrassed to live here anymore. We'd gone from being that HOA scandal neighborhood to a symbol of independence. Then came the county ceremony. I didn't plan to attend, but James called and insisted. "They're giving you the award whether you show up or not," he said. "Might as well stand there and take it." So I went. It was held at the courthouse, a modest event, local press, a few officials, some community leaders. They called my name, said a few words about civic courage and integrity, then handed me a framed certificate. I'll be honest, it felt weird standing up there in my old leather jacket while everyone else was in suits. But when the applause came, I caught sight of familiar faces in the back: Greg, Shannon, Mr. Langley, even a few kids waving from their seats. That was the real reward. Afterward, Greg approached me, looking healthier, happier. "Hey," he said, "thought you might like this." He handed me a small metal keychain, an old HOA tag, polished clean, with the word Cedar Pines board member etched on it. I raised an eyebrow. "Thought you'd want to forget this thing existed." He smiled. "Nah. It's a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked, and what happens when someone finally says, enough." That night, I hung the plaque in the garage, right above the Harley. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the war we fought here, not with weapons, but with patience, truth, and a little stubbornness. Life moved on. Seasons changed. The neighborhood grew warmer, friendlier. New families moved in, ones who'd heard about the place's history and wanted to be part of its revival. Every so often, someone new would stop by and ask about the Harley story. I'd tell them the short version, then grin and say, "Let's just say I don't loan it out." One summer evening, I sat on the porch, sipping cold beer while the sunset painted the sky gold and orange. The world felt still again. But then, faintly, I heard the sound of another motorcycle coming down the street. It was Tyler. He pulled up, parked a few houses down, and waved. I waved back. He was riding a modest bike, not flashy, just clean and well-kept. He'd found his balance again. It made me smile. Later, as he rode off into the twilight, I thought about how far we'd all come, from lawsuits and police sirens to quiet evenings and peace. And maybe that's the real moral of this whole mess. Sometimes, the fight you never wanted becomes the lesson everyone else needed. You don't stand up just to win, you stand up to remind people that freedom's worth the noise. So yeah, they can keep their bylaws and their petty rules. I'll keep my Harley, my home, and my peace. And every morning, when that engine growls to life, I smile, because that sound, the one they tried to silence, isn't just a motorcycle. It's proof that no matter how tight the grip gets, there'll always be someone ready to break free.